Can I have what's left? A simple question that touched a millionaire's heart. Before I start today's story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I really want to know how far these stories are reaching. And if you love intense love stories, full of twists, overcoming adversity, and heartfelt endings, subscribe to the channel. It really helps it grow and motivates me to keep sharing truly moving stories. The night in Los Angeles was unusually cold for early fall. The wind whipped through the well-lit streets of Beverly Hills, swirling dry leaves and hanging heavy in the silence that fell between distant car horns and muffled laughter from upscale restaurants. It was nearly midnight, and the crowd outside the mirrored glass front of Dalton Prime, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, known for its gourmet menu and millionaire clientele, was beginning to thin. On the sidewalk, legs crossed, and a dark grey coat wrapped around her slender shoulders, sat Emily Rose Harper. Her face was pale, marked by the cold and hunger, but even tired, her blue eyes held something striking, a kind of serene dignity that refused to be crushed. Her long, straight black hair was tangled and trailing behind her, touching the ground. Beside her lay a small, dirty canvas bag, holding the last of her belongings, an extra t-shirt, an old notebook, and a yellowed photograph. Emily watched. The clients exit the restaurant in laughter, many leaving untouched food on their tables. There was no bitterness in her gaze, just a contained hunger deeper than her stomachs. It was a hunger for humanity. Across the street, Nicholas Everett Dalton III stepped out the restaurant's side door, adjusting his dark suit's button. Tall, impeccable in posture, with neatly trimmed brown hair and sharp grey-green eyes, he seemed born to lead. The heir to an empire, CEO of an investment network, and owner of multiple businesses, Nick was known for his calculated coldness and refusal to get involved in anything beyond his control. He paused for a moment when he saw Emily. He was used to ignoring people like her, but something about this young woman forced him to look for more than 2 seconds. Maybe it was the way she met his gaze without fear, or that she didn't hold out her hand asking for anything. As he turned to get into his car, a calm yet firm voice came from behind. "Sorry to bother you. Could I have whatever's left?" Nick stopped. He slowly turned his head. The question hit him like a stone smashing a forgotten window. "You want food?" he asked, his voice hesitant, as though the words didn't come naturally. Emily nodded, keeping her eyes locked on him. "I'm not asking for charity, just if there's anything left, whatever was going to be thrown away." The driver opened the car door, but Nick didn't get in. He studied her for a long moment. Her clothes were clean, though worn. She didn't smell of alcohol, nor have the lost look of someone who gave up. She was still standing, still human. Without another word, he returned inside the restaurant. The staff fell silent, seeing him back so late. "Get me a full plate," he ordered, "the same as the one for table 12. "But, Mr. Dalton—" "The kitchen is closed," one of the chefs replied, puzzled. "Reopen it, now." 10 minutes later, Nick re-emerged, carrying an insulated bag with the freshly prepared meal. He crossed the street under the amazed eyes of onlookers and handed the bag to Emily. "It's fresh food. From today, not leftovers," he said, his tone firm, almost defensive. Emily took the bag carefully, surprised. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice stayed steady. "Thank you. I didn't expect this." Nick hesitated, then replied, "Neither did I." For a moment, the silence between them wasn't about distance. It was something new emerging, something neither understood. Yet, he returned to the car without another word. Emily sat back down, gently opened the container, and began to eat with gratitude. Then the building's security guards appeared, disturbed by her presence. One approached bluntly. "You can't stay here. You'll have to move." Before Emily could speak, a firm voice came from behind. "She's with me. Nick had returned. He stared at the guards with a gaze that allowed no debate. She eats here, wherever she wants. Emily looked at him, stunned, and for the first time in years, she felt seen not as an intruder, not as a nuisance, but as someone. She looked down, trying to hold back tears. He, as much taken aback by his own act, turned and left. That night, a simple question cracked the cold concrete of Los Angeles and planted a seed where no one expected it. She finished the meal slowly, savoring each bite like a sacred gift. Her hands still trembled, not only from the cold, but from disbelief. It had been weeks since she'd eaten something warm, and now, sitting on the sidewalk of a restaurant where exclusion once dwelled, she felt, just for a moment, part of the world. Gradually, the street's noise died down, the wind stayed sharp, and the window fronts glimmered with the last reflections of the night. Emily tucked her black hair behind her ear, pulled the worn coat tight up to her chin, and curled against the wall. She thought about leaving, finding shelter before the deep of the night fell. But something made her stay. Behind the glass, Nicholas. Dalton was signing documents with his usual precision. In his elegant upstairs office at the restaurant, he couldn't help but notice the reflection of the sidewalk. And there she was, still there. That determined woman with the weary face wouldn't leave his mind. He stood up and, against all reason, rushed down the stairs with his heart inexplicably racing. When he stepped out the side door, her eyes lifted slowly, as if she already knew he would return. Emily rose quietly, holding the empty thermal bag in her hands. Her blue eyes sparkled under the streetlights. Then, with the courage only someone who's lost everything can possess, she spoke. "Thank you for that. I have no idea why you did it, but thank you." Nick watched her in silence. It was the first time in years someone had thanked him without motive, without flattery, without ulterior intentions, just pure, unpretentious gratitude. "Do you eat here often?" he asked. As if such a question made any sense in this setting, Emily gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Only with my eyes." He looked away for a second. He felt uneasy, as if that sentence had exposed a long-buried wound he didn't even realize still pained him. "What's your name?" he asked, arms crossed. "Emily." She hesitated, then added, "Emily Rose Harper." "How long have you been on the streets?" "Since I was 19. I'm 24 now." Nick took a deep breath, staring down at the sidewalk. It felt surreal to hear someone say something like that as casually as their age. So simple, so brutal. "Do you have anyone?" he asked. "No, just me. And a girl from the shelter. She calls me sister. But we're not related." Nick nodded slowly. He didn't know why he was still standing there, or why he kept asking questions, but something in him refused to walk away. Sensing his discomfort, Emily stepped back. "I don't want to bother you, okay? I already ate. I'll go." As she turned to leave, he called out, "Emily." She stopped. He walked up to her and pulled something from his pocket, a small $50 bill. He held it out hesitantly. She looked at the bill, then at him, and shook her head firmly. "Sorry, but I didn't ask for money." Nick fell silent, surprised. Emily continued, "I only asked for what was going to be thrown away. And you already gave me more than that, more than I expected." She gave a faint smile, turned, and began walking down the empty sidewalk, leaving behind the restaurant, the bag, and the man who, until then, had never felt so shaken by such a simple gesture. Nick stood still, watching her figure disappear into the darkness of Los Angeles. There, amidst the luxury of the city that never sleeps, a man who had everything suddenly felt like he'd met someone who reminded him of what he'd lost. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. The scene ends with Nick getting into his car, but this time there's no rush. He looks in the rearview mirror, Emily's reflection already distant, and something in his expression shifts. As if that question, "Can I have what's left?" was still echoing. But now, inside him, Nick's car pulled out onto Beverly Hills Main Avenue, but he didn't get far. Emily's face returned to his mind like a stubborn echo. There was something about that girl, something in her eyes, her voice, her firm refusal of the money that broke through layers he didn't know he had. No matter how loudly reason told him to forget her, a part of him refused to go on like before. In the move that went against everything he'd learned about keeping his distance, he turned the car around. When he got back, she was no longer on the sidewalk. Nick went inside the restaurant again. The place was quiet, clean, spotless. But for the first time it felt empty. "Mr. Dalton." The maitre d' approached, surprised to see him return so late. Nick looked at the man and answered with unsettling calm, "I'd like a table outside. Set up the garden and bring a hot meal. Actually, make it two." The maitre d' hesitated, then nodded. "For you and someone else?" Nick didn't answer. He simply pulled out his phone and walked toward the outdoor patio, decorated with heated lamps, ornamental plants, and dark wooden tables. It was a private area, rarely used, but now it had a new purpose. Across the street, Emily watched from afar, hidden in the shadows. She had been getting ready to sleep at the shelter. When she saw him come back, she didn't understand, didn't expect it. But deep in her chest, she felt something was about to happen. Minutes later, a waiter crossed the street and approached her respectfully. "Mr. Dalton asked me to invite you to dinner in the outdoor area. He's waiting for you." Emily stood still. Her heart raced. She wanted to say no, out of fear, out of pride, but the cold cut through her bones and the hunger still lingered. Above all, a question inside her demanded an answer. Why would someone like him do something like this? When she reached the lit-up patio, Nick was seated, blazer draped over the back of his chair, eyes fixed on a distant point. He stood up, surprisingly gentle. "You came." "You sent someone to call me," she replied, keeping a neutral tone. "I thought maybe you were still hungry, and figured this would be better than the sidewalk." Emily looked around. Everything was beautiful, clean, warm, the kind of place that hadn't been part of her life for years. "I'm not used to being invited. Usually I'm pushed away." Nick nodded, like someone who understands more than they want to. "You can sit. You don't have to talk if you don't want to." She hesitated, then pulled out the chair and sat down, still cautious. The waiter brought the meals: truffle mushroom risotto, roasted vegetables, and warm, fresh-baked bread. Emily's eyes widened, but she stayed composed. She started eating slowly, as if each bite awakened an old memory. Nick watched her silently. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was sitting across from someone real. Not an ambitious executive, not a flattering investor. Emily didn't want anything from him. She just wanted to eat. She just wanted to exist. After a few minutes, she broke the silence. "Why are you doing this?" Nick took his time to answer. "I don't know," he murmured, "but I think it's because you looked at me, not like the others do. You saw me, and I'm not used to that." Emily swallowed hard. It wasn't a pickup line. It was a confession. "I didn't ask for this," she said firmly. "I know. That's why I'm here." The dinner continued in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was like they both knew they were in the right place, even if for the wrong reasons. At the end of the night, Nick stood up. He discreetly placed an envelope on the table. Emily looked at him, surprised and wary. "It's just a card with the address of a foundation. If you want to seek help, it's mine." She picked up the envelope without opening it. He walked away with steady steps, but inside, a storm had begun to brew. In the days that followed, Nick couldn't focus. Meetings, reports, decisions. Everything felt distant. So one afternoon, as the sun began to set between the golden buildings of Los Angeles, he went to the restaurant and stood on the sidewalk, searching. And there she was, sitting in the same spot, with the same blue eyes, as if she knew he would come back. His heart beat faster, and right then, in that silent reunion, he knew this story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next morning, the sky over Los Angeles was gray. Clouds covered the sun like a silent warning that something was about to change. Emily woke up early at the city shelter, the same one she had been sleeping in for months, with her stomach still light from the previous night's dinner. The taste of warm food still lingered in her memory, but more than that, the memory of Nick's gaze, a look that for a moment made her feel human. She didn't know if she would see him again, but when she opened the envelope he had left, she found the name Dalton Care Center, along with a phone number and an address. The doubt lingered for hours. What if it was just a gesture of pity? What if the whole thing was just a way for him to feel better? But that afternoon she made a decision. She walked to the Foundation's headquarters, a modern building with a simple facade, far from the glamour of Nick's usual ventures. She was greeted by a smiling woman with a warm presence and a gentle voice. "Good morning. Can I help you?" asked the receptionist, Julia, with a slight Texan accent. Emily tucked her long, straight hair behind her ear in a shy gesture. "My name is Emily Harper. I was told there might be a job opportunity here." The woman looked at her for a moment, surprised, then smiled. "Oh, so you're the girl from the dinner." Emily stayed quiet, uncomfortable. "Don't worry. No one judges you here. Mr. Dalton already informed us. If you're interested, we have a shift opening in the food storage." Emily hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and answered firmly, "I'll take it, but on one condition." "I don't want any special treatment. I'm not here out of pity. I just want to work, okay?" Julia smiled even more sincerely. "More than okay. Welcome, Emily." The Foundation storage was in the back of the building. It was a large space filled with boxes of supplies, industrial refrigerators, and pallets of donations from markets and partner restaurants. It was physical work, tiring, but Emily didn't complain. She sorted, labeled, organized. She did everything with focus and quiet dedication. Nick watched her from afar, hidden behind the mirrored glass on the second floor, where his office was. He could see her every morning, with her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, wearing the Foundation's clothes and a large apron. Even so, there was a natural elegance in her movements, a calmness that stood out from the rush around her. She never looked up, never asked about him, never expected anything. In the second week, the department manager, Marcus Blake, quietly approached. "Nick, she's different. Never late, never complains. Already reorganized the entire stockroom, and she's got a patience with the volunteers I've never seen." Nick pretended not to care, but his chest tightened. "Has she said anything about her past?" Marcus shook his head. "No, but sometimes she stops for a few minutes in front of the fruit shelves and just stares into nothing. Then she goes back to work, like she's holding something in, something she doesn't want to spill out." Nick went back to his office and stayed silent for a few minutes. Then he turned on the storage room camera. He saw Emily placing bags of rice on the shelves, then taking off her hoodie to help unload a van. The sun hit her face, revealing deep circles under her eyes and soft marks on her fair skin. That night, he couldn't sleep. The next morning, he decided to visit the storage himself. He wore a light blue dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, no tie. When he walked in, the room went quiet for a second. Emily turned and saw him there, so different from the man at the restaurant. No suit, no wall of power. "You've been working hard," he said. She nodded. "That's what I know how to do, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, but If you're here to check up on me, you don't have to. Nick smiled, a real rare smile. I'm not here to check up. I'm here because I'm curious about who you are, about what brought you here. Emily looked down for a second, then slowly raised her eyes. Maybe one day I'll tell you, but not now. That's fine, he said. I'll wait. And in that moment, something began to shift, slowly, like a silent crack in a wall that had taken years to build. But neither of them knew that this connection, still invisible, was about to be tested. That afternoon, heavy clouds covered the Los Angeles sky. The humid heat made the air feel heavy, and things moved slower than usual inside the Dalton Foundation. Emily, as always, had already organized 3 storage sections when a loud thunder shook the building. Upstairs, Nick watched, lightning form on the horizon through his office windows. He felt restless. Work wasn't flowing, papers were piling up on his desk, and for the 3rd time in less than an hour, he caught himself staring at the security camera feed, where Emily moved boxes with precision and grace. At the end of the shift, he went down to speak with Marcus, but didn't see her in the storage room. As he stepped into the hallway, he ran right into her, also heading to the elevator. Emily wore a grey hoodie, and her long hair was tied back in a messy braid. "Heading out?" he asked without thinking. She nodded, unsurprised. "My shift's over. Want a ride?" Nick offered, even though he knew she'd probably say no. "I'd rather walk. The city helps me think." The elevator arrived and they got in together. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. A strange kind of presence grew, quiet and thick, like the storm moving over the city. When the elevator reached the 2nd floor, the lights flickered. A snap, followed by a slight tremor. Everything stopped. Emily pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. "Power outage," Nick said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "And no cell signal," she noted, holding up her phone with no bars. For a few seconds, they stood in silence, lit only by the dim emergency light. The sound of heavy rain and thunder filled the cramped space of the elevator. Emily leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Nick, on the other side, was restless, not because of the dark, but because he was trapped with someone who unsettled him, more than he wanted to admit. "You seem uncomfortable," she said, almost teasing. Nick gave a slight smile but didn't answer. "Are you afraid of elevators?" "No, I'm afraid of what silence can do," he answered, surprisingly honest. Emily lifted her gaze. "Sometimes it's in the silence that we hear what really matters." There was a pause. Nick sighed as if something inside him gave way. "My sister, she died 5 years ago. Car accident. I was supposed to be with her that day, but I cancelled. Business." Emily didn't move, didn't speak. She just listened, with attentive eyes, unhurried. That was enough. After that, I stopped feeling. Life became routine. Every smile, every achievement, all of it felt empty. Until one day I realized I was just running on autopilot. Emily stepped a bit closer, not intruding. "You know what's worse than losing someone?" she said, voice low but firm. "It's being forgotten by everyone like you never existed." Nick looked at her, surprised. "I wasn't always homeless. I had a house, parents, a bedroom with pink walls. Then illness came. My mom went first. Then my dad lost everything, and I started to become invisible, first at school, then in the streets." She looked down for a moment, trying to hold back the pain burning inside her. "But you're still here," he said, "standing, whole." "No, I just learned how to look whole." The emergency light flickered again. They were close, closer than they realized. Nick was looking at her differently now, not with pity, but with quiet respect, a curiosity that defied logic. Emily held his gaze. There was something unspoken in the air, something stronger than words. The tension between them intensified, the small space, the silence, the darkness, and 2 souls stripped bare for the first time. Nick moved closer, slowly, as if he had no rush, but knew he was heading towards something inevitable. Their faces were inches apart. Emily didn't pull away, but before anything could break the moment, the elevator shook slightly and the lights came back on. The tension evaporated like steam. They both looked away, as if waking from a forbidden dream. The door opened. Emily was the first to step out. "Good night, Mr. Dalton." "Good night, Emily." She walked down the hallway without looking back, but Nick stayed there, still inside the elevator, heart racing. And that night, for the first time in a long time, neither of them could sleep. The next morning, the day began humid, as if the heat, trapped by the previous night's storm, still lingered in the air. Emily arrived early at the foundation, as usual. She wore the light blue uniform of the food services staff, her black hair in a messy bun, and a calm expression despite the sleepless night. Across the city, in a luxurious penthouse of glass and marble, Nick Dalton's phone rang non-stop. He was still in bed, but sat up when he saw his personal assistant's name on the screen. "Have you seen the gossip sites, Nick?" Lauren's voice was sharp, anxious. "You need to look now. I'm serious." He grabbed the tablet by his bed. Just a few seconds of scrolling and his stomach turned. There it was, an image from the elevator security camera. Him and Emily, eyes locked, very close, in the dark. The framing suggested more than what had actually happened. The headline in bold, screaming letters, cut like a blade: "Dalton Empire Scandal, Billionaire Involved with Homeless Woman." In the comments, the internet had already passed judgment. "Gross. He's going to lose everything over a beggar. He's lost it. Was it charity or a fetish? That kind of person only gets close for money. She planned this." Nick shut the tablet hard, but it was too late. The news had already spread like wildfire. Moments later, the intercom rang at the mansion. It was Helen Dalton, his mother. Tall, elegant grey hair in a tight bun, white linen blazer, and eyes cold as steel. She walked in without asking permission. "Is this true, Nicholas?" she said, tossing a magazine onto the table. "You dragged our family name through the mud for a stockroom assistant." "She's not what they're saying," he replied, trying to stay calm. "You think that matters? The elite doesn't care about truth. They want distance. If you don't act now, you'll lose investors, contracts, and respect. You need to clean your image fast." Nick ran a hand down his face, exhausted. He knew how the game worked. He'd grown up in a world ruled by reputation, appearances, and the fear of seeming weak. And then, with a heart full of conflict, he made the worst decision: to walk away from Emily. No explanations, no warning. At the foundation, Emily noticed the change the very next morning. Her co-workers' looks had shifted. Julia avoided eye contact. Marcus kept his responses short. But the worst came when she went upstairs to deliver an inventory report to Nick in person. His secretary blocked her at the door. "He's in a meeting." "I just need a minute," Emily said, her voice catching. He asked not to be disturbed, and he said, "All communication with the team now goes through me." Emily stepped back. The floor seemed to vanish under her feet. Is he mad at me?" The woman hesitated, then replied in a neutral tone, "It's just a temporary measure." Emily walked away in silence, the document still in her hands, her breath faltering. She made her way to the side garden and sat on the stone bench where, days earlier, Nick had first reached out to her. She looked up at the sky, swallowing the pain. Was it all a lie? She whispered to herself. Deep down, she knew it wasn't. The way he had looked at her in the elevator, the way he had listened in silence, the respect in his gesture. That had been real. But sometimes even the truth gets swallowed by the shame of those who don't know how to love. And so, without warning, he left her alone again. But this time, it hurt more. The atmosphere at the foundation had changed. Emily could feel it in the halls. Something one needed to say out loud. The glances that once greeted her now turned away. The smiles had vanished, and the whispers grew louder every time she walked by. In the coordination office, Julia, once warm and welcoming, now had a tense expression. On her desk lay a printed letter with the foundation's logo at the top. Emily stared at the paper without touching it. "Is this serious?" she asked, her voice weak, almost colorless. Julia looked away. "We received complaints, allegations that you used your position here to get close to Mr. Dalton for personal gain." "Complaints from who?" Emily pressed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We can't disclose that, but there's been outside pressure, media involvement. We're being watched. We have no choice." Emily let out a dry laugh, not out of humor, but disbelief. "I just took a job. I worked hard. I never asked for anything. You were seen with him in the elevator on camera. The footage was misinterpreted, and now the foundation has to protect its image." She crossed her arms, feeling the ground vanish beneath her feet again. "So that's it. You're putting me back on the street like I'm disposable." "I'm really sorry, Emily. Truly." But it was too late for kind words. Minutes later, Emily walked out the front door with her old backpack on her shoulders. No reference letter, no transportation, no money. Just her dignity, held together with effort. The overcast sky seemed to repeat the cycle. Once again, the world was pushing her back into nothing. She walked to the shelter where she had slept many times before. The peeling walls and smell of disinfectant felt less hostile than the judgmental faces at the foundation. By late afternoon, she sat in the makeshift concrete yard and hugged her knees, hiding her face in her arms. She wasn't crying from weakness, but from exhaustion. She felt betrayed, hurt, discarded by someone who had, for a fleeting moment, awakened the illusion of belonging. That same night in his quiet penthouse, Nick Dalton flipped through folders and documents, trying to convince himself he'd done the right thing. That's what everyone expected of him. Keep his distance, protect the image, avoid scandal. But nothing made sense. Nothing filled the growing void inside him since she left. The next day, during a visit to one of the foundation's children's centers in South Central, Nick walked among the kids with a local director. He tried to maintain composure, but his mind wandered elsewhere. That's when something caught his attention. A little girl ran up to him with a drawing in her hands. Her hair was in braids, her eyes bright, and her hands smudged with crayon. It was Kayla. "Are you the man in the suit?" she asked, pointing at him with raw childhood innocence. "I am. And you are?" "Kayla. Emily calls me Star. Look what I drew." Nick knelt slowly and took the paper. The drawing was simple, with crooked lines and bold colors. It showed two figures, a woman with long black hair holding a little girl's hand, and next to them a red heart. Above, in large letters, it read, "She is my family." Nick felt his throat close up. "You really like Emily, don't you?" Kayla nodded hard. "She protects me when I have nightmares, sings to me. She said one day things will get better." Nick couldn't respond. He stood frozen, the drawing in his hands. Something inside him broke, in a way that couldn't be fixed with silence, distance, or cold justifications. Back in the car, he stared at the paper for long minutes, while the driver waited in confusion. Her name, the image of that little girl, that simple sentence. It all exploded inside him like an unavoidable echo. In trying to protect her, he had been the first to hurt her, and now he didn't know if it was too late to fix it. The days following the encounter with Kayla were filled with absolute silence from Nick Dalton. No public appearances, no scheduled meetings, no official statements. To shareholders and society, columnists, the heir had simply vanished. But behind the cold walls of the West Hollywood penthouse, Nick was living the opposite of what people imagined. A non-stop internal battle. For weeks, locked away among business plans, ignored reports, and scribbled notes, he retraced every step of the story he'd tried to bury. The moment in the elevator, the cowardly withdrawal, the unfair firing, Kayla's drawing with the phrase that echoed relentlessly, "She is my family." That phrase, more than any scandal, broke him from the inside. And it was there, at that breaking point, that something new was born. It wasn't just regret, it was a deep need to do things differently, to do the right thing. So one day, on a clear and cold November morning, millions of TV screens across the country showed something unexpected. A live image of Nick Dalton sitting at a CBS interview desk. He wore a dark grey suit, no tie, and his eyes betrayed that something had changed. His hair was no longer perfectly styled, and his face, though composed, bore the marks of sleepless nights. The journalist greeted him with professional enthusiasm, but clear surprise. "Mr. Dalton, the whole country is wondering, where have you been these past few weeks?" Nick took a deep breath before answering. "I've been relearning how to listen and relearning how to feel, things that for years my world taught me to ignore." The interviewer paused, intrigued by his sincerity. But Nick continued, his voice steady and deliberate. "Today, I'm here to announce something that's not just a project, it's a form of reparation." On the screen, a logo appeared. The second plate. Because what's left for one could be everything for another. Nick looked directly into the camera. The second plate will be a national network of solidarity restaurants. Places where food that would have been thrown away will be prepared, served with dignity, and delivered to those who need it most. People experiencing homelessness, families living in shelters, children who go a whole day without a warm meal. The journalist adjusted her seat, visibly moved. Nick paused briefly, his expression softening, revealing vulnerability. But this project didn't come from some brilliant idea. It was born out of a mistake, a human failure of mine, and from someone I hurt deeply. He took a breath, and for the first time his voice trembled. "Emily Rose Harper, a woman who showed me what dignity looks like in the face of pain, who asked for nothing but respect, who was humiliated publicly because of me, and who, even while hurt, taught me what quiet courage really means." The journalist opened her mouth to speak, but said nothing, overcome by the emotion in the air. Nick stared into the camera, his eyes misty. "If she's watching, I hope she knows I haven't forgotten, that what she gave me, I can never repay with words, only with action." On social media, the comments exploded. Reactions were intense, some skeptical, others deeply moved. For the first time, the country saw the ICE billionaire crack. In the common room of the shelter where Emily spent her nights, an old TV played the interview. Sitting in the corner in a donated wool sweater, her black hair falling over her shoulders, she held a cup of tea in her hands. When she heard her name, she froze. Her heart pounded. Everyone around her fell silent. She kept her eyes on the screen, quietly. When the interview ended, she said nothing. But her eyes, which for so long had held only resilience, now shimmered with something new. It wasn't forgiveness yet, nor certainty. It was the first crack in the wall of disappointment, a crack where hope began to seep in. Emily didn't move for hours after the interview. Still holding the cup, she sat in the same corner of the shelter, her body present but her soul somewhere deeper. Her name had been said on national television, not as an accusation, not as a scandal, but as a seed. She cried in silence, not out of grief or relief. It was a cry from the most hidden part of her chest, the kind that only comes when someone finally sees you completely, after you've been erased so many times. In the days that followed, Emily avoided talking about it. She brushed off praise, dodged curious questions, but deep inside, something was stirring. She didn't want to hope, but she couldn't help it. On the morning of the opening of the second, Plate Solidarity restaurant, the city woke up to a clear sky. The event was held downtown Los Angeles, in a restored building that used to be an abandoned fast food chain. Now, the place had been transformed. The walls were painted soft colors, inspirational quotes filled the windows, and the entrance was decorated with flowers and simple flags. Emily walked there without telling anyone. She wore a modest beige dress, a gift from a shelter volunteer. Her black hair was loose with a side braid clipped back with a small golden pin, a subtle detail but full of intention. She didn't want to be seen. She just wanted to witness it. She stood among the crowd on the sidewalk, blending in with others, people without homes, families with children, and curious onlookers. No one recognized her at first, and she liked it that way. Nick stood on a small makeshift stage in front of the restaurant. He wore a light blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves and dress pants. No microphone, no formal speech. He spoke directly to the press and guests, with emotion, more human than ever. Today's not about me, it's about everyone who's been ignored for far too long. This place proves that dignity isn't a luxury, it's a right. As he spoke, his eyes scanned the crowd and then stopped. She was there, in the middle of the sidewalk, quiet, among so many faces, but impossible not to see. Emily felt his gaze. Their eyes met. Time froze, and everything else disappeared. Nick stepped down from the stage slowly. He walked through the crowd without saying a word. When he reached her, they just looked at each other. No words were spoken, but there was an entire ocean of feeling in that silence. He held out his hand, not as a businessman, not as an apology, but as someone who had finally learned that to love, you need humility. Emily looked at his hand for a moment. Then gently, she placed hers in his, their fingers intertwined like they'd always belonged together. Then he pulled her softly closer. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. In their gaze was everything: forgiveness, guilt, restrained desire, accumulated longing, the kind of love that survives even when it seems impossible. Nick brought his hand to her face, and with his forehead resting against hers, closed his eyes. Emily whispered, barely audible, "You took your time," and he replied only with a sad, sincere smile before kissing her. It was a kiss full of pause, of surrender, of rebuilding. A kiss that wasn't a beginning, it was a continuation. No one around them dared interrupt. Staff, volunteers, journalists, and people living on the streets watched in silence. Many with tears in their eyes, others smiling. It was as if everyone knew they were witnessing something rare, a reunion that didn't just belong to those two, but to everyone who had ever been left behind. When their lips parted, Emily was still holding his hand, and in that moment, the pain that once divided them became a bridge. Time passed quietly, as if respecting a process too delicate to rush. 3 months after the opening of the first Solidarity restaurant, the news cycle moved on. The spotlight searched for new scandals, new headlines, new controversies, but Nick and Emily didn't. They, instead, chose to disappear from the world that shouts, to learn to live in the world that whispers. On a quiet street in downtown Los Angeles, lined with old houses and mature trees that shaded the sidewalks, there was a small white house with wooden windows and flower boxes freshly planted. It was there that Nick had chosen to start over. No bodyguards, no chauffeur, no assistants, with clipboards, just him and her. In that modest home there was more truth than in any mansion. Emily, now with her hair tied in a low bun and a soft sparkle in her eyes, spent her mornings studying. After years of being discarded, she was now officially a nursing student at a community college. The scholarship had been offered anonymously, but she knew it came from him. She studied at the kitchen table, surrounded by highlighted, Textbooks, colorful pens, and a cup of tea. Nick, when not at the Solidarity restaurant or managing the new social project, stayed nearby. He read old newspapers, watered the plants, made her coffee. It was a simple routine, but rich in meaning. One evening, sitting on the small blue couch in the living room, surrounded by blankets and a pile of books, Emily leaned on his shoulder and said softly, "You could be anywhere, in Paris, in New York, with someone the elite would approve of. Why here?" Nick turned slowly and looked at her profile. "Because here I can breathe." She smiled, eyes glistening, and replied, "It's strange. After so much pain, I'm still afraid to be happy." "I'm afraid too, but I'm more afraid of being unhappy again, out of fear." Their relationship wasn't perfect. They had striking differences, unresolved trauma, open wounds. But for the first time, both wanted to stay. They wanted to learn together, and most of all, they wanted to build something not based on appearances, but on truth. Nick, for his part, officially cut ties with most of the partners and investors who tried to shape him into a display piece. He sold his shares in projects he no longer believed in and poured everything into the Second Plate, which was now expanding to other cities. His former friends laughed. The press said he had lost his mind, but he didn't back down. "You're throwing away your inheritance because of her," his mother once asked, her tone icy, and he answered calmly, "I'm building a legacy because of her." Emily followed it all in silence. She didn't need promises or jewels. The greatest gift Nick gave her was consistency, the care, the sincere look he gave her every day, even when he was tired or frustrated. One Sunday afternoon, returning from the neighborhood market with bags in hand, they were approached by a woman holding a phone. The camera was recording. "You're the scandal girl, right? The one who messed with the billionaire's head." Emily paused for a moment, but before she could respond, Nick stepped in and said, "She's the woman who taught me what courage really is. If that's a scandal, then the world is scandalously blind." The woman lowered her phone, embarrassed, and they kept walking hand in hand. That night after dinner, Emily stood gazing at the moon through the window. Nick came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She turned, rested her head on his chest and whispered, "Promise we'll keep being us, even when the world tries to change us again." He kissed her forehead gently. "I promise, because for the first time in my life, I like who I am when I'm with you." And there, in that small house, among rebuilt dreams and slowly healing wounds, two worlds that once cancelled each other out learned to coexist, not perfectly, but truthfully, and that was love. The end of the year arrived with colder air and streets lit with colorful lights. Los Angeles, though unfamiliar with snow, had its own way of celebrating December. Storefronts sparkled, avenues buzzed with rushed crowds, and voices blended into the back and forth of holiday bustle. But on a quieter street away from downtown, where there once was an abandoned parking lot surrounded by graffiti-covered walls, something new had emerged. The old space had been transformed into a welcoming community center with wide windows, exposed brick walls, and a simple sign at the entrance, Second Chance House. A place where no one needed to explain why they were there. A place where dignity came before any help. Inside, the activity was constant. Homeless men and women received meals, guidance, basic care, and above all, someone to listen. Young volunteers and marginalized elders shared the same table. Children laughed in the courtyard. And at the heart of it all, Emily walked among them with the calm of someone who had once stood on the other side. She was heard, she was respected, she was seen. Nick, beside her, no longer wore suits. He preferred simple shirts, comfortable pants, and rolled-up sleeves. He carried boxes, wiped tables, served soup, and no one needed to know his last name. There he was, just Nick, someone who had learned too late the value of simply being present without needing to control anything. On the last night of the year, after everyone had gone and the dining hall fell silent, Emily climbed to the small glass room where she kept her study materials. She sat at the old desk, opened a well-worn brown notebook, and began to write. Her handwriting was gentle and round, but what flowed from her pen came from somewhere deep inside. December 31st. Today ends the most unexpected year of my life. I started it on the cold floor of a shelter, invisible to the world. And I'm ending it here, in a place where people walk in with shame and leave with hope. But it wasn't a plate of food that changed my life. It was a look that saw me as human, that saw through my dirt, my pain, my silence, and didn't look away, stayed, listened, stayed. Today, I no longer have to ask for what's left, because I understand now that real love isn't what's given out of excess. It's what's given with presence, and if I can give back to someone just a little of what I received, then it was all worth it. She closed the journal gently, holding back the tears that came with gratitude. When she stood up, Nick was standing at the door, watching in silence, with a soft smile on his face. "Writing again?" he asked. She nodded, quietly wiping her eyes. "Maybe someday you'll read it." "Maybe," he replied, walking up and hugging her from behind. "Or maybe you'll publish it. A lot of people need to hear what you carry. Inside, I just write so I don't forget. Then write one last thing for tonight." Emily turned, her face lit by the room's warm light. "Write that sometimes what's left for one is all another person needs to live." She smiled, pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "And to love." Outside, fireworks had begun, but inside that small room, the new year had already begun. No empty promises, no fantasies, just two whole hearts. That survived, that chose each other, that stayed. And this was the story of Emily and Nick, a journey of pain, resilience, and true love, born from the unexpected. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd really love to know how it touched you. If you liked it, give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs this message, and of course subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. And before you go, I've picked another touching story that'll reach even deeper into your heart. Watch it now, you won't regret it.